Britain's making more armies. And then America's going like, oh, they're making more armies, then I'm going to make the strongest army. And then they're all making armies, okay? They got more stronger and stronger. And then later on, Germany decides to like expand its territory and invade Europe, some parts of Europe, and like build an empire, which France and Britain had. Like Britain had lots of colonies around the world, like India, and they earned lots of money and gold and slaves from it, and they sold it to America, and they earned lots of profit. And then, so Germany's the one who's actually the most responsible for the war. But Austria-Hungary, and there's this country called Serbia, which is a really small country. Serbia assassinated the prince, so Archduke, it's called Archduke, so the prince kind of thing of Austria, Serbian. And then Austria declares war on Serbia, and then Russia, which was on Serbia's side, like Serbia's allies, Russia moves its army to the German side, and then Germany declares war on Russia. So right now Austria attacks Serbia, and then Russia attacks Germany, and Germany attacks Russia, and then Germany sends its army to the west, where France and other little countries like Luxembourg and Belgium is, and also Britain. So yeah, the French armies get ready to fight, and then Britain wants Germany to not join the fight, and then Germany just invades Belgium and Luxembourg and those little countries like Switzerland, and also invades France. And also Britain joins in the war. So right now the major countries are Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, and Russia. But Britain's colonies like India and some parts of China like Hong Kong and Macau, they brought armies, and like they made lots of guns, and those like they got some metal and those stuff from those other little colonies. So over 100 countries, well, people from over hundreds of countries joined, well, over 100. And then it became a global war from Asia, Africa, and also they had wars in Northern Africa as well. The Germans invaded North Africa somehow, and then, yeah, and the Germans were very strong, and then Germans actually invaded the whole, well, nearly the whole France, and then they were just like fighting in the front line, where there was like France and Germany, and they would just keep on fighting here, and then Germany made up poison gases and those new stuff, and I'll just go detail right now. So World War I was a different war from other different battles. Before, when they had wars, they needed lots of horses for cavalry, so the armies like persons will go on the horses, and then with a spear or a gun, they'll just charge, and then like the armies are just standing here, and then the horses will just crash over them, or just like stabbing with the spear, or like they just shoot, and that's like, yeah. So also the guns, they'll sometimes have like a long sword in the end of the sword, so when the gun didn't have any gunpowder or bullets, they'll just go like, and so they can fight like that. But World War I was different war from others, just as I said before, and they had trenches, which is you dig the ground and you just go down there and just keep on shooting above. So you dig a ground. So it's like, if this is flat ground and I'm standing on here, you dig a hole, and then like you just like here and go like this. So every person who just comes here dies. So Germans made the trenches, and then French went like, oh, we should build trenches as well, and they built trenches, and then nobody could really attack. So for example, if this was the French trench and this was a German trench, let's say so how to win the battle is invade the other trench. So Germans will go like, oh, let's attack, and then when all the army goes over, the French and German, they both have machine guns. So if they had machine guns, what happened is machine guns would fire 8 to 10 bullets in 1 second. So what will happen is, and then your body is just cut off, so your top part of the body just falls off, and your legs are just standing, and then it just goes like, and then just, yeah, falls off, and you just die. You just get cut off in half. So that's like really impossible to, it's like really impossible to invade. So what they had was gigantic cannons at the back, like really, really back of their own trench. And then they just fired cannons to the other trench, but they had to get the distance right. For example, they have to get as far as possible to like get into the trench, but sometimes they would like aim it wrong, and then they'll just fire to their own trench, and some of their own armies will die. And yeah, that's how it goes. And also, another one was Germans made poison gas. And so Germans had gas masks on, and then they said Operation blah blah blah, and like and get the new weapon out, and then they'd spray the gas, and the gas would just spread around the ground, and then it would just suddenly like go and then like go under the trenches, and then the French and the opposition, the enemies, we just couldn't breathe, and then they get blinded and like they'll just slowly die, and then the Germans kept on invading trenches like that, and then the French and the British, those side, they made their own poison gases to invade the Germans. So Germans always had their gas masks on and like always carried their gas masks. And also British people, they made good gas masks, and British and French, they make very good gas masks and good poison gases. And one of the famous gas called mustard gas, that didn't work. Like the gas mask didn't work on the mustard gas, so even though you're wearing a gas mask, you would still die. So they tried to make a better gas mask to defend those poisonous gases. And then this is just another thing. After the war, because poison gas still killed so many people, they said let's not use poison gases anymore. So they had this kind of agreement. So if you use poison gases, then you're breaking the rules at the war. And also British tanks first came out in World War One. So British made the tanks, so the British. And do you know Winston Churchill? Winston Churchill is one of the most, well, it is the most famous Prime Minister, and kind of like the, Prime Minister of Britain. And he was like a admiral, like he wasn't like a high rank at the Navy. And then he supported the idea of having tanks from these like it's like weapon thinkers. They think of new weapons, which is like which could be like good for the battle. And then Churchill supported it, and when Churchill became Prime Minister, tanks first came out, and it was just like a parallelogram. So like it would just like tip over and it would be still alright. And then they had small holes which you could just put a machine gun in, and the person inside the tank would just keep on shooting. And then they had cannons on the side and on the top, which they just fired and killed heaps of people. And in front of the trenches they had barbed wire. So what it is like it's like thin metal how should I say, strings. They're just curled, and they had like kind of like spikes all over it, and then they had in front of their trenches. So even if you go on the ground and then you try to invade the other person's trench, you have to destroy that barbed wire. So then what tanks did was, tanks were, at the time it was very slow. It was just about like this speed. So the infantry, so the normal army men, so if this is the tank, then they would just like walk behind it just like this, and then they'll just like shoot like this or something. And then later on it became very fast that people could not keep up with it. So anyway, tanks destroyed and killed lots of infantry and lots of men. And they just crushed the barbed wire and just went over trenches. And then like, when they went over trenches, the machine gun people inside the tank would just shoot into the trenches, and then people in the trenches would all just die. Germans were like very surprised by that stuff, and the Germans thought it was just like a metal monster, and bullets didn't work, it would just like reflect. So what they made was like a really good, they made really good guns that can penetrate, so like go through the tank armor, and British made better tanks, and also French made tanks as well, helped by the British. But nowadays, and in World War II, Germans also made tanks, and Germans make more tanks now. Better tanks, more better tanks. And a new thing I could probably say is, infantry became really important. So infantry is just those men with guns and just your body. There's two things. Cavalry is army on horses, and infantry is just men on 2 feet, just walking and running with swords or shields or guns. The infantry became more important as cavalry because of trenches. If you use cavalry with horses, if you just go charge and then the machine gun will shoot at the horses and the horses will die, and then people on the horses will fall over, and then when they fall over, they'll shoot machine guns and they'll just cut in half and just die. So horses they didn't really use much horses. They only used it for transport, like supplying stuff and then in those purposes. So infantry became extremely important because the humans did, the men did everything. Like they had to like supply and like they had to talk, communicate, and like they had to run over here and there and like reporting and stuff. Like they only used like donkeys, mules, and horses just to like for bringing heavy stuff like big like cannons or something, just like carrying around. Yeah, so that's basically it, and I'll just give you some special tips. And they also made warplanes, but the planes at the time weren't very good. They were just usually made of special type of wood, and then they'll just fly over enemy bases to see if they're to just check, and like it's kind of like spy planes. It's checking if they're doing all right and like if we should attack or not. If they had lots of armies or not much armies, and what they did was, if the plane's up there, it's not really high. So what they did was, with like a gun, like, oh, let's have a bet. Like if I shoot him down, I get $100 or like. And they just had bets, and like they used machine guns and just like little, like even like small guns. Like they'll just fire and then the plane will just go down. So it wasn't that much use. But later on in the war, they started to have planes that can fit like 2 people. So one person's piloting, and one has the small space with bombs. So one guy at the back just pulls it up and drops bombs into the ground where they're flying. And then they had dog fights. It's called dog fight when planes fight each other. It's called a dog fight. I don't know why. It's called a dog fight. And then they started to have these tricks like going like upside down and the flips, and then like they're just shooting like guns. And there's also like a guy who's just on a machine gun and firing. And then later on they started to have missiles and like bombs, like automatic bombs and like good missiles and like torpedoes that go through water and stuff. And then Germany also made submarines, really good submarines. And then they started to attack American ships because America made heaps of money by just selling like weapon stuff to the British and the French. So what Americans did was they made heaps of factories, and they made heaps of weapons, and the British and French were like, oh, can I have that? And like, I'll pay extra if you make it today. Like for example, I want 2,000 guns, and like and the American guy was like, oh, we can only make 500 a day, and then like they go like, oh, we'll pay you more money, so make me 2,000 tomorrow, and then they go like, oh, okay, everybody work until like 7 a.m. like don't sleep, and they'll just get heaps of money, the Americans. So Americans just got more money and money and money and money. And in 1917, so 1 year before the war ended, so 1918 the war finished, in 1917 the Germans kept on shooting down American ships that carried the supplies like weapons and food or something like that. And then so America declares war to the German and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and countries. So America brings heaps of army, heaps of these new random weapons they've never seen before, and they're like very good. They're so strong, and like if you shoot like they could go through like 2 or 3 people at once, and like they're so good. And then it's like fresh new like 18, 19, or like even 17 sometimes. And, like they'll like lie their ages, so even boys like 14 like me or 13, 15 would go to the war because they want to, and then like there were like hundreds of thousands of armies, like Americans, like just coming from the west, and then some armies like went around the bottom way, and then they just kept on going, and then Germany surrendered, and all the Austro-Hungarian Empire surrendered, and yeah, that was the end of World War I. Yeah, okay, that's the end. Thank you for listening.